Hello, fine folks, and welcome to Booghy Plays. Tonight, or depends on which side of the pond you are, here in Europe tonight. This morning, they're in the USA, the US of A. I am not playing. We're not doing a playthrough. We're doing a an interview. My guest tonight is the designer of well, my first interaction with his games was Manhattan Project Energy Empire. And since then, I was quite curious to see what he will come up there next. Unfortunately, I was not able to play some of his other games. I have managed to play the Andromeda's Edge, and I am very pleased to have on tonight Mr. Luke Laurie. Hello, Luke, and welcome to Booghy Plays.
Hello. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
It is my pleasure first and foremost. So, as I have told you, this is going to be a two-part. Let's call it a two-part interview. The first one is more about you, and the second one is still about you, but it's going to be some. It's going to be a fast questionnaire. You're going to have to answer pretty fast to it. So let's start with the beginning because we will go very in the beginnings. And my first question, should I go direct into questions or I should ask you how's the weather in California? I think I should ask you how's the weather in California.
Well, California is a really big state. So right now it is very sunny and it is cold and it is raining and it is snowing and it is windy, all in California. Where
Only
I am right now, there's a little bit of an overcast sky and just a light rain on the central coast of California, but it's still nice enough that I'll be going outside and riding my bike later today.
Oh, cool. I've seen that you do a lot of outdoor sports these days. Riding your bike, posting lots of pics with you riding your bike keeps you in shape, probably. A way to keep in shape.
I'm trying my best to live a life of balance between work, with creativity, with my family time, and with the fitness stuff. It's always a challenge balancing it all, but every chance I can get, I get out there and get on my bike and combine getting some exercise and being in nature. It's a
I,
real contrast to sitting at a computer screen and staring at spreadsheets or whatever it is that I have to get done to to do that hard cognitive work.
I see. Um, so now that we have introduced, we've laid the introduction. I'd say let's go into the interview part and let's go way back, way back. And my first question to you is, where were you born and where did you grow up?
So I've lived in California almost my entire life, and I'm from San Clemente, California, which is down in Orange County. It's the same county where Disneyland is in Anaheim, but it's a little beach town. And yeah, I've lived my whole life mostly on the central coast of California, which is not well known to people outside of California. It's kind of halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles,
Okay.
and it's smaller towns, some of them beach towns, some of them touristy. It's a place where we have wine, and we have a whole lot of outdoor activity, but it's also a place where you have small rural agricultural communities too.
I see. Um, and uh, what did your parents do? What were your parents' professions?
My dad was a carpenter, and so I grew up around a lot of building. My mom didn't work, and but she was into collecting antiques. So I grew up in a household that was there was a lot of creativity in that household, a lot of dysfunction too. But I kind of grew up with a lot of opportunity to pursue my own interests,
I
and
see.
so I was a Lego kid, and then I discovered this really strange new phenomenon called Dungeons and Dragons when I was
We'll
about
get there.
10. Yeah,
We'll
about
get
10
there.
years old.
We'll get
Yeah.
there. Don't hurry. Don't hurry.
Okay,
Uh,
I'll save it.
do you have any siblings?
I do. I have two brothers and three sisters.
Oh, so a big you are in a big family. Where were you in the ladder? The
Middle.
in the middle. So you were
Yeah.
let's say somewhere you weren't the spoiled one, but you weren't the who got all the harsh things.
Yeah, somewhere between the forgotten child and the having to take responsibility child. That's kind of where I was.
Yeah. So growing in a not in a way artistic family, because being a carpenter, you have to be artistic. Your mother being collecting, growing having so many siblings. What was childhood like in where you grew up
Mm.
in your family and in your area also?
Yeah, so you've seen you've seen Stranger Things and these E.T., these shows that kind of shows and movies where you're looking back on what growing up in the 80s was like. The kids on bikes,
Yeah.
and playing Atari, um, discovering, video games in the very like early primitive times, playing with GI Joe and so on. So I grew up in that era, like
So you're a
the
child. So you were born in the 70s, grew up in
I
the
was born in
80s.
the 70s, grew up in the 80s, and so I grew up in that 80s era, and yeah, playing in the arcade. Originally that was how you played video games, right? You went to the arcade with quarters, and if you were really rich, you had an Atari. So sometimes I got to go to my friends' houses where they had an Atari or a Intellivision or a ColecoVision, or later on they had like an Apple II computer. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, Commodore 64.
Yeah, where I am from in those years, you could not find, but we found about those from TV shows and everything else.
Hmm.
This is how we found about what your childhood was like in the 80s. It is so different to a communist bloc 80s. It's completely different. Uh, so
Imagine.
um, so it was, let's say, it was a very free childhood. You are allowed to explore, to um, find your ways. Let's say play a lot, have lots of friends back then. Um, what playing meant to be out? So you're practically the generation that started with video games in the US. Um, did your family played any board games with you when you were a child, or you discovered, as you started to say, on your own?
Yeah, we had like the old classics, like we'd have Monopoly and Scrabble and things like that. I learned to play poker pretty early. My dad taught me how to play poker, and every um,
What age? At
every
what age?
every Halloween we would actually play poker for all the Halloween candy that we'd gone out and collected. So at the end of Halloween, one of the kids probably had all the candy and no one else had any, and then you'd be begging to get it back again. Um,
That's interesting.
yeah,
Playing poker for candy.
I think some of the games that we think of as kind of the dawn of the modern games were out there at the time, but I didn't have exposure to some of those games until later. So gaming for me early was like those old traditional board games. And Monopoly was something we would play if we like all homesick from school or something like that. Um, and then the early video games. We did eventually get an Atari console at home, and otherwise I was playing video games in the arcade. So yeah, I was kind of there at that kind of early beginning of those types of commercial games,
Did you do a high
until I was 10,
until you
and
were
then
10?
something happened.
What happened when you were 10?
So I go to a sleepover at a friend's house, and it was like a big birthday party, and he had a bunch of friends over, and there were some of the older kids had these little books, these Dungeons and Dragons books, and they were just like the thin ones. They weren't like the advanced Dungeons and Dragons hardcover books. And they asked if I wanted to play, and I sat down and I got this little, miniature that was literally made out of toxic lead. I got little dice. Um, the dice, those dice in those days, they had the cool shapes, right? The polyhedral shapes, but they were really ugly. You could barely see the numbers on them. They were like grays and gray yellow and gray brown. We didn't have the cool translucent ones at that time. But we played Dungeons and Dragons, and I was being walked through this story as my little elf character, and I was hooked pretty quick. And as soon as I could, I saved up some of my allowance from my chores, and I started to hang out at the little bookstore that was on my way home from school. And even before I could afford the books, I would take them off the shelf, and I was allowed to just sit there in the bookstore and read, and I would just read the books. And so eventually, when I could afford it, I got the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook and the Monster Manual. And pretty quick, I was running my own sessions, and I became the Dungeon Master. And I was mostly the Dungeon Master for most of the time that I played role playing games for about 30 years, from about the time I was about 10 to about the time I was about 40.
Oh, so so it went all the way through. Um, so you outside, so you have discovered and probably played a lot. Did you play with friends, or did you play? Were you close to your brothers, or to your siblings, or you played more with, I don't know, friends or classmates or things like that?
Yeah, I had a couple of different groups, and some of those groups were pretty long lasting. So I played with friends at first. I have two younger brothers, but they were quite a bit younger than I. But yeah, I quickly roped in my little brother, Leroy. I think he was probably about 5 or 6 years old when he was playing Dungeons and Dragons, and he was pretty smart for his age, pretty mathematical. Um, and yeah, so and then eventually my other younger brother got involved later when I was maybe in my 20s. I had a group that involved my youngest brother also. Um, I think probably the kind of the prime time for me playing was probably in my late 20s, early 30s, when I had a group that we kept going for like 7 or 8 years, something like that.
I see. Um, uh, did you do high school in the same area that you grew up? I suppose. But to university, where did you go?
I went to
Okay,
Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and I wasn't really involved in the gaming stuff too much in either college or high school. It was kind of like there was school and then gaming was somewhere else. So I wasn't really involved in any clubs. I didn't really go to any game conventions or anything like that. I just had my little group on the side where we'd play D&D.
I see. So what did you study at college, university?
I studied to be a teacher, and it was studying teaching, education, and then also physical science and earth science. So I I got my bachelor's degree, my master's degree, and yeah, I that was the path that took me to becoming a teacher.
And which you are still today, right? You are still teaching.
I am still today. I've been a teacher for almost 30 years. I teach junior high science.
So, okay. So if you did college probably in the 90s, right?
Right.
Um, in the 90s, there were a resurgence of board gaming. Uh, did you have did you meet modern board games back then, or where did you in when did you got introduced to did you get sorry introduced to modern board games?
So I think I caught just like a little sprinkling of the modern board games, in that I had I'd obtained a couple of games here and there along the way that they might have been precursors to modern board games, attempts at making something a little bit different. But nothing that really took me in the direction of what we would call Euros at that time. In the late 90s, I did start to play Magic the Gathering.
Okay.
And so I played Magic in the late 90s and into the 2000s. And I think that was part of my part of my movement into more modern board games was Magic, in that now I'd go to attend events at the game stores. So at the game stores, you're playing these card games, and you see there's all these other games around there. And at some point around 2005, 2006, I started to have some friends introducing me to some of these other games. And
What was it, the
I
first one?
remember the one that I remember the most distinct that I really actually went out and bought was I played San Juan.
I see.
And San Juan is like a card takeoff version of Puerto
Puerto Rico,
Rico.
yeah. Yeah.
And it's has a little bit of the characteristics of like Race for the Galaxy. And then I also had another friend. At one point, we learned Settlers of Catan,
Okay.
and then I had a friend come over, and he taught me both Dominion and Agricola.
Okay.
So Dominion was a huge hit for me. Agricola, I wasn't ready for that yet. Um, and one of the other players got more workers than everybody else, and they just ran away with the game, and you just watched them play. And I was like, that sucks. You just get one more worker, and now you win. And so I made it my life's passion to make sure that would never happen in any of my games later.
Not no workers. You cannot get more workers, huh? Well,
You can get more workers, but that isn't the secret.
well, yeah, that is pretty important. Agricola to have more workers. So practically, you were hooked. Let's say you were hooked. Today, What are your favorites of games? What types of games do you prefer playing?
So, um, yeah, I wanted to say something a little more about the
Sure,
transition
sure, sure,
also,
sure. Please,
because
please,
it's
do go
important.
on.
So part of it was that when I started to play these games, these board games and card games that were not tied to a campaign, not tied to having the same group have to show up week after week. So what we started to do was we'd try to play our D&D regular sessions, and sometimes we couldn't get all the players back together to continue the adventure. So we would play the other board games. So it was almost like they were just there to
To
fill the time
yeah,
because we couldn't play D&D.
yeah.
So something that we learned was that um, you could continue to do these board games all the time, and you didn't have to worry about having that consistency of players, and that was super appealing. um, as time went on, I of course started collecting, but I think I started getting into like designing them almost right away, because I'd always been designing D&D adventures all along. So there's probably never a time when I was playing games where I wasn't kind of thinking about how I would do this myself.
Okay, let's not move.
And because
Let's
and because so much of my time is spent on the creative side of things with making games, my choices about what to play, I don't get that many chances to play
yeah,
games.
for sure.
And my work life, my family life, plus the design time takes so much, and my games are so huge. They require so many replays, so many tests, that yeah, my time is limited. So while some people might play a game for 5 or 6 times, that same game, I have a really immersive 1 or 2 plays of it before I'm playing something else.
I see.
Um, I've been pretty lucky that the last few weeks, and this year I've gotten more of a chance to play some of the new stuff, and I've been pretty excited about some of the new games coming out right now. Um, Last year I got to play Hegemony several times, and I really, really enjoyed that. Um, Definitely enjoyed my plays of Unconscious Mind, Endeavor Deep Sea, Civolution, SETI. Uh, yeah,
So I see.
there's so many great games coming out right now.
I see a preference towards Euro games, more of a Euro games. You're more of a Euro gamer, but so are you a how would say? Would you call yourself a? Do you play any party games? Because this is the one of the. Do you manage to play party games? Do you like playing party games?
I do. I do like playing party games. I feel like party games are fun when you get kind of a real diverse group of folks together and it's a larger group and you're not out to have that, rich cognitive experience. You just want to kind of hang out and play this thing. So there are groups that I get together with at conventions. There's a regular game of Time's Up that gets played late night at some of these conventions. Um, Trying to think of what other ones we get played regularly or often. I get roped into party games that I don't necessarily know, but I also like Ameritrash games that can be, cutthroat and full of, randomness and stuff like that. So I really like Thunder Road Vendetta is really great. One of my favorite games of all time is Star Wars Rebellion, and Star Wars Rebellion absolutely is full of all this chance and chaos, and I definitely wouldn't consider it a Euro game.
That's a two-player game, right?
Yeah,
That's only a
yeah.
two-player only, if I remember correct. Okay. Um, so you are starting to get into my next question, which is when did you start thinking about designing? So you are starting to say that well, pretty much from the beginning, I was thinking, I was having the idea of designing. So when did you started to think, well, I might want to do this? I really might want to do this.
So I was the kind of D&D dungeon master who couldn't do anyone else's pre-written module. Like I might think I could, and I would buy it, and I would look at it, and I'd be like, this has a lot of cool ideas, but I don't like really how it's all structured. I don't like all this kind of artificial structure to it. I want it more open-ended. I want a world that people can explore. I want stories that are not predictable. I want to take them someplace new. So throughout my time with D&D, I was constantly designing the adventures, but along the way, sometimes you come across these situations where there weren't good rules for what you were trying to do. So you would try to make your own rules for different situations. Um, I did like doing all this stuff where I would use miniatures and I would like build maps and I would try to build props and things that helped to do those stories. And then when I started collecting a lot of miniatures and a whole lot of those plastic D&D miniatures, I played some of the D&D skirmish game, but I didn't really like those rules, so I started making my own rules for that. And that was even before I got into more of the Euro tabletop experience. So sometime around 15 years ago or so, I believe, it's probably maybe a couple less years than that, I started like seriously sitting down and designing a tabletop game. And my first game where I got it as far as putting together a prototype and testing it, I called Age of Prophecy. And it involved kind of getting different kinds of worker type pieces in different areas of a kind of a fictional ancient Greece Mediterranean type place where the the gods were real and they really meddled in things. And part of what you were trying to do is do your farming, go to war, do your trade, but do it all within the context that you had to kind of try to find out what the gods' plan was because they were going to mess with everything.
See.
And so from that came an idea about how you would peek at different cards that were the different kinds of prophecies that you could read, and once you read the prophecy, you would know what's going to happen next. Like, do you want to go farming, or is the next agriculture card going to bring the locusts and eat all of the crops? So um, that led into kind of a mini game that was just the peeking at the cards part, and you were putting these little markers next to it that were your seers, and then that actually became my first published game, which was called Stones of Fate. So the seers became stones, and you'd put the stones next to the cards, and how your timing about flipping the cards and getting the orientation of your stones around the cards determined whether or not you would win that card and gain its ability. um,
I see.
so it was a light, simple 2 to 4 player game. And a friend of mine was ambitious to become a publisher. And so Cosmic Wombat Games was founded, and they did a Kickstarter and published Stones of Fate.
So your
And
first game was kickstarted. Uh,
it was, yeah, my first game was Kickstarter. And Kickstarter was not brand new at the time, but it was still pretty early. And even while that was in process, I was already starting a whole bunch of different design projects, and really started to dabble in both the craft of design, but also the studying of things about the industry. And myself and several others banded together, and at the time having a blog was a thing.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
we went together and we formed the League of Game Makers, and we started writing. And we were writing columns, articles, interviews, and publishing 3 times a week on our blog site. And I was fortunate that I just happened to meet some really great people going to conventions, mostly in Los Angeles and in the San Francisco Bay Area. And yeah, I'm still in touch and work with several of those folks today. The League of Game Makers, a whole bunch of those people went on to become published designers and publishers in the industry.
Um, so how many designs did you shelve before you published the first one? That first one.
That that's hard to know. I do know in those early days, I didn't necessarily do as much on my computers. And so I don't necessarily have great records for that. But I always keep spiral notebooks of my design
Yeah.
work. And so I fill spiral notebooks with ideas and ideas and ideas. And I have a gigantic box of those spiral notebooks. There's probably, I don't know, maybe it's 40, 50 spiral notebooks full of ideas. Um, and then I go and I take those ideas, and then my next step is to build prototypes. And I do go and I do, some simple graphic arts and build prototypes. But I've estimated that over this time period, I have shelved about somewhere around 85% to 90% of my work.
Okay.
So what I end up with keeping and running with is probably only 10% of my work.
uh, but probably all other things helped you on different things in the future, most likely, because in the end nothing is lost. Everything it just adds up, as it is with writing and everything. And so after you have published that one, so the main game that so the game that brought you to my attention, let's go, it's it's Manhattan Project Energy Empire. That is, I think, your second published game, or
It is.
yeah.
Yeah. Energy Empire was my second published game. And I was pretty lucky because there's a whole lot of stars that aligned for that game to get published in the way that it did. Um, at the time, we were writing on the League of Game Makers website, and I actually started a series called How to Design a Worker Placement Game. And I'd been researching other people's designs. I'd been talking to designers of some of those games, and I'd been really digging into what makes them work, what makes them interesting, and then what are new directions we can take worker placement that haven't been done yet. And one game that was pretty strong at the time and was one of my friend's favorite games was the Manhattan Project. And I thought highly of the game, except that I always felt like the turn where you pull back your workers, and this is true in some other games, the turn where you pull back or the turn where you have to pass or the turn where the round is over, always felt so dissatisfying. And so what I really wanted to do was take the turn where you pull back and make it to be kind of this like this moment where you've actually gotten to this point where you get to kind of collect the fruits of your labor. So with Energy Empire, the original design for it was called Drill Baby Drill.
Drill Baby.
And at the time,
it was a different theme, probably.
It was super, super similar, actually, but it leaned just a little bit more towards petroleum.
I see.
And so what happened was I was at the Kubla Khan Game Convention in San Francisco. I had my copy of Drill Baby Drill. I was playtesting the game. Sitting at this table were Peter Vaughn, who is well-known designer and developer. He is Cardboard Alchemy.
Yep.
Previously, he was with Breaking Games, and he developed Dwellings of Eldervale with me and helped come up with the original idea from that game in the beginning. And he was the developer and publisher for Andromeda's Edge. Peter Vaughn was sitting at that table. We were playtesting Drill Baby Drill. And also sitting at the table was Seth Jaffe, who was with Tasty Minstrel Games,
TMG, yeah.
Very well-known, respected designer. And he also wrote with the articles with us at the League of Game Makers.
And he still writes. He has his own blog that I've read a lot of his articles about design, and I've done an interview with him also. So you can find an interview on the channel. Sorry to interrupt you.
So the other person at the table, and I'm probably as I retell this story, this might be embellished because all these things happened not necessarily in this sequence.
Okay.
Aldo Giazzi was also playtesting this, and I actually think that this was a second game. There was more than one game of the weekend. And Aldo was running a company that actually distributed the Manhattan Project. So they were a company that facilitated distribution for several publishers, including a lot of publishers who were doing Kickstarter type projects. So Minion Games were one of the things that Aldo worked on. So Aldo went right away and told James Matthew of Minion Games, hey, you got to look at this. This thing could be a Manhattan Project game because of its similarities. And also Seth Jaffe was interested in it for Tasty Minstrel. So over the course of that summer, long story short, Tasty Minstrel got a chance to try to publish it. Minion Games was also very interested in it. And then when I was actually at Gen Con that year with Tom Jolly, and we sat down and we had a table at the designer publisher speed dating, we're sitting there and we're showing the game to different publishers. But James Matthew of Minion Games, when he saw me walk into that room, he said, Luke, put that in my bag. He didn't want anybody else to see Energy Empire. So anyway, long story short, we changed it slightly, made it a little more nuclear. And over the course of the next year, it was developed, and me and Tom Jolly worked on the development. Josh Capel of Burnt Island Games, he did the art. And that is, he did the graphic arts, and he also had someone else do some of the line drawings as well. But got to work with some cool people, got to make a great game, and was well liked. And that game is going to be on Kickstarter in February,
Yeah,
coming up real
it's
soon,
gonna be
February
again. Yeah.
2025. There's a whole new version, new art, and it combines the Cold War expansion that came out several years ago, and also some new expansion material that's
Material. Yeah.
all going to be there as one cohesive game.
So, let's, you did also afterwards. I have to ask you: do you have a designer philosophy? Do you have a certain philosophy when you start designing a
Mm.
game?
So yeah, that's kind of interesting. So my mind is always going with my own ideas thematically, um, concepts mechanically that I appreciate and like, and then from there, I'm always trying to look for kind of a thematic mechanical synergy that can tell a good story, make an interesting experience. I almost every time I sit down and play a game, I think about other uses for mechanics that I see, or I think about ways of taking mechanics like ones over here and like ones over here and how I could put them together.
Yes.
I take both the things that I like about the game and things that I think I'm critical of and use that to inform my own work. But I don't have a singular philosophy, but I do have some landmarks that I tend to stick with. So some of them include um, try to minimize the number of times a player has a bad turn. I want a lot of good turns in the play. A turn should feel like either I really did something cool this turn, or this is really going to help me do something really cool soon. Like I really want that kind of sense that you're on your way, that you're progressing. In my designs, I like for players to be able to put together combinations of things or find ways that things connect, that they might have that experience where they feel like no one's ever pulled this off. Like this card in this circumstance with this other circumstance does something that might never be repeated again. Um, I have another concept that is the external threat. I like a sense of tension in my games. That it's funny because I like games that are calm where I can just kind of relax and exhale. But in my designs, I don't want players to relax and exhale so much that they start falling asleep. I want that sense that there's some tension, that not only do you have to get the resource and get the card and do the thing, but you got to do it, or people might lose their lives if you're not good. Like there's this external threat that's gonna tear everything apart. It's gonna destroy your work, or there's gonna be some kind of crisis. One game that I've played a lot of times with friends and always come back to is Battlestar Galactica. That sense of the tension, that sense that you're worried about what will occur next, and you're going to try to mitigate those harmful effects. That's definitely one of my um, design hallmarks, I would say, or something I try to strive for. I don't know if that's a cohesive philosophy or not.
Well, there are no, it's some points that you try to implement into your designs. Do you work alone when developing? Do you like being a developer, or do you like working with someone else when developing a game with a developer?
I like Yeah, I like to be able to have a degree of autonomy where I can go into my headspace and I can write and I can draw and I can create, and I can build with a sense of freedom. But I know from having worked with great people that my work is always better when I have partners who are also invested in seeing this game become the best game it can be. So I've been really lucky to work with and befriend Tom Jolly, who really kind of helped me get started because he's like a legend of a previous generation of games, and he helped me kind of, find my way into this world. And he used to live near me, and so we got to play in person quite a bit, but he's since moved away. Um, I've got to work with Scott Caputo on Whistle Mountain, and Scott has a unique mind, unique way of looking at spatial aspects of games, and so he's all into these tile games. And we got to take our two design styles and put them together to make a game that we both agree is not a game that either of us could have made on our own. Um, and then working with Peter Vaughn on Dwellings of Eldervale and Andromeda's Edge, Peter has this way of really, really being invested in the theme, but also in this idea that he wants to make a product that shines in a way that shows that it's something that no one else has quite done something like this before. And he's always pushing me to create more options for players so that they can keep coming back to the game and experience it in a different way. So, I come forward and I'm like, well, I've got 8 different unique factions with unique abilities. And he's like, can you do double that?
I see. So you enjoy having a developer who will help you. I don't know. Most likely make the game better in the end, because I don't think, maybe you can find it. The designer hat is one thing. The developer's hat is a different one, and when you try to put both hats, is it easy to take one out and put the other one on? Because usually the designer wants to put as much as it can. The developer wants to make it as a streamlined experience as it can be.
So my experience has been pretty different with different folks that I've worked with, because, and it's also kind of different from everything they told me. When I started, there was really a sense that publishers wanted cheap, they wanted fewer components, and they wanted the games to be shorter. They wanted that streamlined idea was the kind of where the pressure was. Then when I was working on Energy Empire, I found some of that to be true. But at the time, Kickstarter was changing, the market was changing, and there was still a sense that, like, no, you kind of got to make your game shine a little bit more. And that was a transition for Minion Games, where they put more effort into making the Manhattan Project have really nice dice, really cool components, these cool oil barrels that were in there, thick cardboard, vibrant colors. And so that investment and that not being encouraged to trim the game down was something of a surprise to me. So then I found that in all of my projects, because my projects tend to be these bigger Euro style games, I haven't ever really been encouraged to trim very much. There's always a sense that you want to remove parts of the game that are redundant, that are not fun, or that could be combined, synergized somewhere else. Like maybe this card and this card could actually be the same card in one deck, and you find a way to make that work. So yes, some degree of streamlining, but also there's a metaphor for this. They say cut the fat, but we found sometimes that the way that the market wants to go, and sometimes the way the developer pushes the game, you're not cutting the fat, you're actually wrapping the thing in bacon.
I see.
There's more than one way to make the game better.
Okay.
Another lesson that I learned along the way is sometimes more components actually can streamline a game. We get this idea sometimes in our head that somehow that fewer components is going to be better. But sometimes then if you find that you're using these fewer components, but it kind of tells a little less of a story, because having a one-to-one correspondence between a component and the function sometimes is a more streamlined way than having one component do a whole bunch of different things. Both of them can be interesting ways to go, but sometimes matching what's the most intuitive thing for the player's mind to do involves making that one-to-one correspondence, and adding an additional component sometimes takes away cognitive work that the player would have to do during the play. So you asked also about just kind of the sense of development versus
For the
being a
designer, yeah, yeah,
designer.
yeah, yeah. It's
And so in almost all of my games, I have seen them all the way through to the end, either doing development or working closely with a developer. So that would include things like late minute additions to make additional content, running play tests and determining, if changes to the game have broken it, kind of late game, proofing files and so on. There was no real developer on Energy Empire. It was just James Matthew doing production, Josh Capel doing art and layout and things like that, and then me and Tom Jolly kind of being in charge of the design work and playtesting work.
so you had to
So,
put the developer's hat on.
so I've always had both hats on, but I've never had to be in the position where I was the last person responsible for it. So, in other words, there's always somebody above me who would have that final cut, that would make that call, and that's a safe feeling a little bit, because ultimately we do want folks that can see past our own blind spots, because we all have blind spots, and recognizing that working with others is going to get us past those blind spots, I think is a really important thing when we're making creative work that is that can be so complicated, really, to evaluate cohesively.
Yeah. Um, so you entered a bit of the realm of playtesting. How many times you playtest a game before it enters production?
Oh, I I don't know. Um, Probably hundreds, though those are not necessarily all my plays.
Of
I
course,
the
not
plays
yours.
would
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah,
plays would be with other
yeah, yeah, yeah,
groups and
yeah.
so on. And sometimes I have no idea how many times a particular group has played. And now that a lot of play testing has moved online, with like centralized, coordinated online play tests. Sometimes it can be difficult to tell how many have occurred. But me personally, I'm a believer in doing rapid iteration. So I don't keep play testing something that is mediocre. I change it. So that probably reduces the number of play tests, because sometimes I can play one play of a game and make 10 changes to that game before I play test it again. And I have to be a little cautious about this, because I have been involved in projects where they experience so much change that now you created a whole new cycle of unsolved problems. So you have to balance fixing things that aren't working without unfixing things that you've already solved, in other words. So yeah, it varies a lot. I know that probably each of my larger games had hundreds of play tests. That said, I know that there are fans who probably played some of my games more than I have, because
Yeah,
some people are extremely committed
yeah.
players.
Yeah. No, it's not exactly about you. It's about how many times the games are play tested before they enter. Because there is another issue when how do you balance player input when you play test? Because of course, you're gonna have lots of ideas, lots of playtesting, lots of ideas, lots of people have their ideas, but that's not gonna be necessarily the best idea, or not necessarily the best idea for the game. How do you manage to balance all the ideas in order to get your game across, or and maybe in the end fight the publisher or fight whoever needs to in order for you to in the end get out the game that you want to get out, not necessarily a game that pleases everybody.
I actually, oh man, there's so many ways to attack this question. So, first of all, for many years, I was really involved in running playtesting events at conventions in the San Francisco Bay Area. So we would call these, they were the Bay Area Protospiels. And so I'd run these Facebook groups on playtesting. I would coordinate getting folks, playtesters, involved in the events. And we would have, as many as 50 designers and publishers bringing their games to these events, and hundreds of folks coming in and out of the rooms all weekend long, doing playtesting. So my experience with the playtesting isn't just as a playtester pushing my own games. It's also been, I think I'm getting a battery issue. Let's see. All right, do you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah,
Okay. I'm switching from my headset to my built-in mic on my computer. Hopefully it doesn't shift your audio
no,
input too
it's
much.
very much. It's okay.
So some of my experience was also helping other designers learn to playtest. So kind of getting them in that headspace, the norms, how to accept when playtest is uncomfortable, how to deal with place testing scenarios where you kind of want to optimize making sure that you have the right play testers, the people who are your actual target audience. Because so we design games in lots of different ways and with different kinds of themes and different kinds of depth. And there's no perfect game that reaches everyone. Instead, we have some games are better for some people, and some games are going to be better for this group. Sometimes there's a Venn diagram of intersection, but a playtest isn't going to be very useful if the folks playing it really aren't the types of folks who would buy and enjoy this product. So when you go and you look at all of these factors that go into making a good playtest, then once you've set those conditions, you have a good playtest, you have the means by which the players can learn the game well, you have the right you have a prototype that facilitates the playtest. Sometimes the feedback will not be great if the prototype isn't at the caliber where players are interacting with it in a meaningful way. If they have to guess because the iconography or the visuals is so far off from a finished version, then what you're evaluating isn't the game, you're evaluating their attempts to kind of decipher something that isn't clear. So then you get playtesters who will give you the feedback, and if you've set the conditions right, then hopefully your feedback is going to be useful. Sometimes no feedback is of value. Sometimes people are really looking for problems and they don't find anything. So I pay attention to the parts of the game.
It stopped. Oh, okay, okay. Sorry. To the parts of the game.
Do you hear me
Yes, I can
again?
hear again. Yes.
Yeah. So those brilliant headphones, if you touch them, they connect again. So I accidentally touched them.
Okay.
So anyway, sometimes you get playtesters who they really really have some kind of issue with the game, and they will tell you what they think was wrong with the game, and they will give their suggested solution. A lot of times their feedback about what was wrong is really valuable, but their solutions are not necessarily valuable. Sometimes the solution would potentially change the game in a manner where it would open up a whole can of worms of other problems. Um, you also touched on the idea of getting a game balanced, and there isn't a magic formula for that other than that I try to consider what is possible on a given turn and what is the value of a given action, and then how can actions trigger other actions in a way where you can still create some limits and that within those limits things will be balanced. This is especially challenging when you're building something that is an engine builder, because engine builders are inherently unbalanced if somebody gets kind of a head start.
Correct.
And so
That's where if you have more than one vector about how you approach the engine building, that you can create more curves, kind of more natural limits on what's possible. So for example, in both Energy Empire and in Andromeda's Edge, you build your engine, but you also need to build the resources, the energy that's going to feed and power the engine. So part of your engine in Andromeda provides you with your energy, but it doesn't give you a lot of other things. And so you have to balance, I'm getting the energy here, I'm building these other sources of taking additional actions or generating additional
Resources. Yep.
resources. But players have to balance these two things in order to create a very functional engine. So it creates some breaks on one player just building the engine first and then just leaping ahead. Um, Energy Empire, you got to acquire the energy dice, efficient energy dice like your power plants, and then you roll those dice. And then to get more dice, you might have to burn some oil. And to burn some oil, you're going to have to get the oil. And all of these things go into creating you kind of got to weigh these pros and cons about how you invest in the engine. But then I also try to take the engine itself and separate it a little bit from your ultimate outcome, your ultimate goals. So you can run the engine all day long, but you can't win that way. You have to take whatever it is you've created and go use it in another manner. And so that's another way of kind of creating, you kind of have to balance your action efficiency with what you've done to produce versus actually taking the production and then turning it into something of value for your goal in the game.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that makes it clear.
It, that,
It's not magic sauce. There's no like perfect formula that works for every game, but it's considering all of those factors and how they fit together is how you achieve the kind of balance.
yeah, yeah. Balance when it comes to balance. I think there are different approaches as I've seen because I have talked with different designers and they all see it differently. But when it comes to randomness, uh, how do you deal with this balance of perfect information versus randomness in your games?
I like to have some of both. I love to roll dice. I love to roll dice. I love to draw a card from a deck that's like all or almost all unique cards. I like the surprises and I like tactical adjustments in games. Um, a game that is strictly open information, yeah, I can enjoy that game, but it's never going to give me that kind of aha, that excitement where you just explode with the joy that I got this lucky thing and I can combine it with this thing and I found this way to on the fly put together this tactical choice that's going to change my outcome, that I'm going to get something really great out of this. That said, I don't want a game where you just sit there and roll random dice and that's how many victory points you get. Um, the the nature of the randomness has to be about how the randomness creates opportunity, not how the randomness creates success.
Okay.
So I'm looking at ways that you can have that fun of the random generation of values or the random acquisition of cards and effects, but then it still requires the creativity and the ingenuity to make the most of that
It's
randomness.
more about creating small steps, not not swing the game one way or the other towards a player or another player.
Yeah, and so as I'm looking at different card effects, I'm looking at different abilities. I'm trying to look at that their effects fit within a certain range. Where that can be an exception is sometimes you'll have they certain effects that are good all the time. You want to narrow down their effect. If it's good all the time, you want to make sure that it doesn't give you too much all the time. Conversely, I think it's okay to have in games an effect that is more situational but more powerful. And so as a result, there are some cards in Andromeda's Edge where sometimes that card's in your hand and you're like, it's not even useful to me at all in this game. I can spend it as an X resource. Sometimes there's the
Yeah,
ability to spend
cards as
any
resources.
resource.
Yeah, as any resource. Yeah.
You'll just burn that card. Maybe I'll trade it in over here for something else. Um, but then in another game, that very same card is going to give me 12 points. This all lines up with everything I'm doing. This is super exciting. I save that card and I play it for that time. I think that kind of randomness is okay, where you have situationally valuable, really cool stuff. And so then that also creates more variability in how the story plays out of the game. That in one game, something has more value, in another game, or with another faction, another set of situations, this thing can have more or less value.
When it comes to player interaction, for example, in Manhattan Project, in NG Empire, you don't have direct player interaction. In Andromeda's Edge, you have direct player interaction. How what do you tilt more towards, and how do you deal with it?
So in my own designs, I tilt more on the side of you're going to have some aspects of the game that you have almost 100% control over. Your own tableau, I kind of like to make your tableau mostly sacred. People are not going to be
To
able to
mess with it, yeah.
destroy or completely take over your tableau. They might be able to tinker with it just a little bit. But out there on the main board, I want there to be interaction. And I want that interaction to be significant. Um, in it's varied in some of my games. In some cases, just blocking is one form of interaction, but in other times, like your choice and what you've chosen to invest in or produce or changes the values of other players' choices in that shared area. Sometimes it's a race to get into a spot to get area control. Sometimes it's a race to get a certain resource. Sometimes it is about how you occupy and change the dynamics of the board that's going to encourage or discourage conflict. With both Dwellings of Eldervale and Andromeda's Edge, we have that direct conflict of battle. And while battle in the game, in both of these games, doesn't prevent you from taking the core action that you really intended to take, the battle can have consequences that can be both positive and negative. I've tried to create opportunities and scenarios for where situationally losing battles can be of a benefit, and that losing battles can also come with an inherent benefit as well. So because these games are worker placement games, your ability to place and where you choose to place your workers, which is in Dwellings of Eldervale, you're placing your wizard, warrior, and your dragon, and in Andromeda's Edge, you're launching your ships.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but when you lose a ship and it comes off, that also means that you're potentially now opened up to go places. So, for example, you're not allowed to launch a ship to a place where you already have a ship. And having that ship get destroyed actually now opens that location up to you. So creating more than just this raw, you lose and your score goes down and I win and my score goes up, it changes the dynamics. And that's also something I want to see in games where you don't have this sense of really kind of static opportunity on the game board, that the game board is alive and that players are affecting it. And the board state with it ever changing becomes one of the kind of the factors that you have to consider tactically as you go about your turn.
See, do you have any input on artwork, on graphic design and things like that? Or do you like having any, or do you leave everything to the publisher?
I think in almost every game I've worked on, I've had the opportunity to proof artwork. And that doesn't mean that I have final say on it, but usually they do want to reach out with me. They want to see, do you like this artwork? this artwork tell the story we're trying to tell here? Um, is this ion stormy enough? And a lot of times I give my input with the understanding acceptance that I'm not the art director, that I'm not the product developer, that I'm not the publisher, that those decisions are above me, but here is my perspective. Sometimes I will provide my input with the hopes that that we can make a change that will fit better with what the concepts were. Sometimes the publisher's coming to me because they already kind of know what they want and they want to see if I actually agree so that they can have like a stronger case going back to the artist, like, oh yeah, we really do need to make this change. Publisher thinks so, art director thinks so, and the designer. Plus, they can always like, you can always blame the designer. It's just like, nah, the designer doesn't want that, so change it.
Yeah.
I've I've been extremely lucky because the each of the publishers I've worked with has really gone out of their way to make my work look good. And that's a really lucky situation to be in. I never had that situation where I got the final product and I opened it up and it was a disappointment. I've always gotten to have that experience of kind of like happy surprise. Not everything came out like in the way that I preconceived it, but I can see this is good. There's some good stuff here.
Usually does not come out the way you preconceive. It's impossible because you're working with someone who also has a vision,
Yeah.
and sometimes it might be better. Sometimes, usually, it's always better than what you first envisioned.
What I try to do as a designer though is I do think through what kind of those kind of the look, the feel, and what the user interface will be like, how you're going to interact with this game. So what I haven't seen is like when I do the layout, like I want the board this way, I want the cards here, I want these kinds of actions in this location, and having them in this order, having things in columns here makes sense because it lines up with how you build your tableau. Or it makes more sense to put this over here on the edge of the board rather than in the middle because that kind of arrangement is just cohesive for how people are going to move their hands around. I try to do a lot of that work for the publisher so that if they did go with what I did, what I've made, it will be okay. So I don't hand over to publishers something completely abstract. My work is pretty concrete. In fact, like if you think of like Andromeda's Edge, I literally built structures out of wood as prototypes for those developments.
Oh, cool.
The observatory, the city, the factory.
Mhm.
So when I'm thinking about how that game's going to be, I don't know what the final city or the final observatory is going to be, but I know that part where you take that leader and you insert it in and you put it on top of your transport, it's going to build that structure. That concept is something
Mhm.
that
You
came
want
from my work
to think
thinking
about,
ahead.
yeah, yeah. You thought about it ahead.
Yeah.
Um, and we should touch a little bit on this topic also, which is replayability. Um, uh, in these days, there are there are some players which will play a game until they bury it a long, long, long time. But there are most of the players will play a game 5, maybe 10 times. When you think about your game, do you think more of the players will play it 10 times, or the ones who will play it 300 times or 400 times?
I want my game to be good the first time it's played. And I go out of my way to make sure that there is enough that is interesting and accessible that hopefully most folks can sit down, play my game, and even if they lose, that first time they play, they're going to have enough feeling of discovery, enough feeling of accomplishment that they will want to come back and play it again. Now, I can't change people's styles of play or what's interesting to them or not. But if my design has that kind of connection to them, then I'm hoping that this will be something that can become like a mini hobby. And then layered onto that, this idea that you could feel like when you sit down at the table that you're already playing it in a special way. So I do really like individual player powers. I like factions. I like the sense that what I start with and the direction that I start going is slightly different than the person next to me without being completely prescribed.
Okay.
So there are games out there where your starting choice of what you're going to be kind of dictates your entire game plan. And I'm not necessarily a fan of that as much as I am this idea that I can explore this in different ways. I will be able to make choices that affect my outcome. And that if I want to try to find a new way to play this, that's open to me, that I can try to find that here. So I am thinking about that first play, that first experience. And I'm also thinking about, is this game going to continue to be satisfying with repeated plays? Are they going to be able to come back and find new combos? Are they going to be able to discover and play out different factions and different ways? And yeah, that's entirely what I shoot for.
Um, if yeah, this. So, how do you create those different? In a way, it's you reach a point, then you have to choose point A or point B or point C or point D. Then from point D, if you choose point D, then you're gonna have to choose from point A. From um, how does a designer manages to create this network of choices in order to make the game feel, as you say, fresh every time?
So, so what I try to do is I try to have a system where the core system itself, take take Andromeda's Edge, for example. The core system itself is launching a ship, go to a region, perform an action,
Okay.
or take all of your ships, pull them back, use the actions in your tableau. So that core system has already choices built in, and it already has built-in layers. Each player has different types of ships, the types of modules that you are going to have in your station, that you're going to be running in your tableau. Those inherently are going to be different and built and selected differently. So you kind of start with this. I build a network that already is fun and interesting, and then I layer those different effects so that all of the different aspects of the game are going to be kind of pulling different levers and interacting with different parameters in ways that are fun and interesting. Um, as long as I'm meddling with and modifying the existing network, I've got a whole lot of design possibilities there. And then when I look at new things that I could add to the game or changes that I could make to the game, I look at which parts of the game have I not explored with, which rule hasn't been broken somewhere. So by finding ways of creating exceptions that didn't previously exist, now you open the game up to something that players want to do. So you start with that network of options, you have that layer of restrictions and limits, and then you find little ways of creating the exceptions and so on that kind of fills in the space between that network of choices.
I see. Um, so
But it's not a decision tree. I think that the network of choices that is too complex to think about all of those different possibilities that would take you in those different directions. But what we do have to watch in play testing is what are the results of iteration. If this gets repeated 2, 3, 4, 10 times, what would be the outcome of that? And that's where you go back and impose limits to prevent those things where something could get out of hand.
I see. Um, And do you have, how do you go, you start from mechanisms and then go to a theme, or you start from a theme and then try to either adapt mechanisms that you already know or invent maybe mechanisms in order um, to adapt to the theme?
Yes, it's it's all of those. It's all of those different ways. It's kind of a little more like somewhere in there is the game, and all of these different things are kind of orbiting around it. And sometimes I start on a theme, I start to build the mechanics. I really like the mechanics. They're coming together, but they're more well suited for a different theme. And then it kind of takes me somewhere else. Sometimes I am working on some mechanics. They're kind of interesting, and I start to attach them to the theme, and then I find that that theme drives me to build more mechanics, and eventually I abandon the mechanics that got me there from the beginning. Um, I am super into themes. I'm super into kind of what story, like how does it feel? What am I doing when I'm sitting at this table? Even sometimes if it's a little bit abstract, I still want to feel like I'm doing something and doing something interesting. Uh, and so I'm thinking about games while I'm, watching movies, TV shows, while I'm thinking about just issues in the world. Um, all of that drives the ideas of theme. And I also, when you sit down and you play a game, you want a degree of distance from reality. So
Yeah.
I do want games that don't make you have to relive the trauma of the day or fill you with a sense that it's too many reminders of uncomfortable stuff. Can't we go back over here to the stuff where I can't even think about that ordinary day? Because I think escaping in games is it's one of those benefits to this hobby, that it's not that we're avoiding reality all the time, but we've got to take a break sometimes in order to approach it in a healthy way.
Yeah. So we are slowly getting out of this designer questions, and I want to ask you a difficult question. I would say, what
Mm.
is fun to you?
What is fun to me?
Yeah.
There's actually a lot of things that are fun to me.
Oh,
It's
in gaming mostly, yes.
something that I something that I really, really enjoy, and this is something I strive to put in my games, is this idea that I just I just did something that I didn't know was possible, that the other folks at the table didn't know was possible, that it's a surprise, but I was able to put together these different things and come up with an approach to the game that is unique, that is novel. That sense that you get to feel a moment of brilliance by putting some things together. Sometimes the other players look at that with like this great admiration and excitement. Sometimes you just ruin their day because now they're watching you have all the success and they just took an ordinary turn. Um, yeah, I really enjoy games where I get to dig in and go, yes, I get to put this together, and it all comes together, and this helps me. And I felt that moment of like inspired creation.
Um, well, what could you talk us fast through how is a day, how a whole day unfolds for you usually?
So here's my current day as a full-time teacher and practically full-time designer is I get up at about 6 in the morning and I do my morning routine, making the coffee, getting started, and I design usually right away in the morning. So, as you might have seen, I'm pretty responsive about everybody's posts on
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Facebook. BGG, and I try to get into Discords too. So I try to answer everybody's questions as much as I can for all of my games that are out there. So I do that. And then I am at my computer doing work on designs. Sometimes that's putting together sketches, picking icons, arranging things, doing drawings. Sometimes that's just writing notes into my spiral notebook. Then I run off to my teaching job. I do my teaching job with all my heart, except I do always have my spiral notebooks ready. So if an idea comes to me during the workday, I can sketch it down on my spiral notebook. I can come back to design at my break or lunch a little bit. Um, After school, I like to sometimes have meetings, but sometimes I'm out there. I get on my bike, I go ride. I ride in some different modes. Sometimes I ride no headphones. It's all there for the exercise and experiencing nature and kind of like not thinking about cognitive things in the same way, more feeling that exhilaration, just seeing nature. But my mind's still on the slow parts of the ride, maybe on the climbs. I start thinking again. I go back to my ideas. I go back to my creativity. Um, I don't always design at night. Sometimes after my ride, I go back to a brewery. I drink a beer and I'm writing while I'm drinking a beer. Sometimes I'm corresponding. And and then it's over. The day is over. Some days I'm doing woodwork. Some days I'm having to hit the books and do writing and reading and things related to my schoolwork, grading papers, lesson planning, posting things online, etc. I'm uh, I'm pretty busy,
Pretty.
and I'm looking forward to a time when I'll be able to be done teaching because I've done my share and to move into working on games full time.
I see. Um, what can you tell me? What is? Well, you kind of told me, but I'm going to ask you. Beside that, beside Dungeons and Dragons, what is your most played game, Euro game wise?
It's probably Dominion.
Dominion.
Uh,
Okay.
it's partly because Dominion, we've played it with friends, we've played it with my kids. My son, it's probably one of his favorite games. Um, so we played the heck out of Dominion, all kinds of different expansions, different combinations of cards, and so on. It's just one of those games. It's just real easy to just throw it down on the table and play it.
Yeah, if you have the cards well, well separated, then
Oh
yes.
man, yeah, that's a thing too. Um,
um,
so in terms of a game with a board, I mean, it has to be my own games. There's no way I've played anybody
Outside
else's
your
game.
own, outside, of course,
Uh,
outside your own, because that's clear. Yours have to be the most.
See, and I'm lucky if I play any of my games 5 times.
The final
Uh,
copy, probably
yeah,
the final copy.
yeah. I know I've played games like Stone Age a lot of times, Lords of Waterdeep. Um,
More gateway.
Probably more gateway games I'd really want to play more are games like Feast for Odin. I want to play more Unconscious Mind. I want to play more SETI with more people because I don't think it's very good at two. Um,
I've designed a two-player variant which I placed on BGG. Very
yeah,
simple for the two-player mode because I don't find it good. I didn't find it good with two at all compared to three or four. I think three might be a sweet spot for it. So I adapted some things to add to go more to a three-player experience. But I digress. Yeah,
yeah. Actually, getting a game to work well that's two, we'll do two player, three player, four
four-player that's
player,
hard.
that's good solo. It is difficult to do, but I think it's super important.
Yeah.
I really, really try to make sure that my two-player plays of my games is solid and enjoyable.
Yep. Do you have a favorite game?
That's a hard one too. That's a super hard one. I think it's kind of a moving target, because the game that I want to play the most at any given time is probably my favorite game.
Yeah.
And the lens shifts pretty quickly as I go and I discover other things. There's always something newer and shinier out there. And then there's also those games where, yeah, it's kind of my favorite game, but I also don't really want to play that right now. So I'll give you probably my favorite from playing last year was Hegemony.
That is a good title. I love that game. It's a great game. Now, do you have a favorite designer?
Oh, and now you're making me think of another game too. So it's funny because I think favorite designer, and then I think, but I really only like one or two games by that person. And then there's that other one I don't really like. But I am a huge fan of Concordia by
McGurts.
Mac Roberts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Concordia is an absolute masterpiece.
I
And
highly concur. Highly agree.
it's because of it is extremely simple to play, and the manner in which it opens up the choices as you play is just really, really interesting. Now that said, thematically it's pretty dry.
Yeah, it's trading
It
in the Mediterranean one way or another.
that's right. Good thing we traded in the Mediterranean. Uh,
Yep.
but yeah, Matt Garrett's fantastic. Stefan Feld, oh yeah, Vitalis Serda. Um, yeah, there's lots of great designers, and I'm glad to know a lot of the great designers. But I also, everybody has games that I like and others that I do not.
Uh, uh, yeah, that's absolutely normal. Um, Now, there is a saying, which is ignorance. There's no other authority like it. It
Mhm.
was said by Orson Welles a long, long time ago, and I like it because it's truth both ways. Because there's a lot of times you want to be ignorant because that will might take you further than you think, but on the other hand, it's not good to be ignorant all the time, because there are a lot of ignorant people which think they're an authority. I really love that quote, and I do not like to be ignorant usually. So I want to ask you one more question in this part, which is: would you want something to add, something that I might not have asked you?
Hmm. Should we have a game about the Dunning-Kruger effect?
I don't know. I don't know. What's the?
Uh, the myth that when you know one thing, you know other things. Yeah. So
I don't know.
I don't know. I think we covered a lot. We covered a lot of good and interesting topics, and yeah, I
Okay.
think we're good.
Now, now we go to the second part, which is a questionnaire, which was first taken. It was first made by Marcel Proust, and then it was taken by a French Bernard Pivot is his name, a French host, and then was from Bernard Pivot. It was stolen by James Lipton in Inside Actor Studio. If I know if
Oh,
you've ever seen it, and from him I stole it.
okay.
And the first question is, what is your favorite word?
Possibilities.
What is your least favorite word?
Can't.
What turns you on creatively, emotionally, yeah, creatively, emotionally, spiritually?
The sense that I can make something meaningful.
What turns you off?
The idea that I may never be understood.
That's interesting. What is your favorite curse word?
Shit.
Such so smelly. So that's so much oomph. What is your favorite drug? It has to be, it can be everything. It can be not necessarily effectively drugs. It can be everything. It can be.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clearly whiskey. Good scotch, a good peaty scotch is my favorite drink.
I see. Um, what sound or noise do you love?
Hmm. Wind in trees.
What sound or noise do you hate?
The bell that class has begun.
Um, which profession outside the one you already do you would not you would like to attempt? Sorry.
I want to be a game designer when I grow up,
But you do. You are a game designer. Something other than that.
but it's not my profession.
Oh well, it is. You're a professional one, so let's say
Or
part-time professional.
I,
But if something else, something that you have not been able to do, you would have loved to do.
there's so many things I would love to do, but I don't want the pressure of having to do it professionally. Like, can I just do this and not get paid? I like to do woodwork. I like to build. This is my daughter's bedroom. I built this. Um, yeah, I like making stuff. Probably any number of careers where I was making stuff. I enjoy to cook too, so it could be cooking. I don't
Chef.
know. I have admiration for the people whose job it is just to pour beer and make conversation. That looks like a great job.
Uh, yeah, pour beer, make conversation. That's a new job. What profession outside the ones? Yeah, uh, you would not like to attempt
Hmm.
teaching.
I don't want I don't want to have to take care of small children.
A small educator for small children. Yeah.
No preschool.
Oh.
I'm not, no.
And my last question, and the big one: if, again, I say, if heaven exists, what do you expect? What would you expect God to say to you when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You made it?
Thank you, sir, for this fine time you have given to me. I hope you had fun. I hope you felt well. Um, I want to thank you for taking the time to do this interview. And yeah, again, a big thank you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. I was glad to be here. I hope that everyone who watches this gets something out of it, enjoys it, and yeah, this is good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. I will do the final words. I can't ask you to not close the connection, so we finish it afterwards. So, again, I want to thank Laurie, for helping me do this new interview with you. You can find others also on the channel. We will be doing some more. Hopefully, you find this informative. If you find it, please like, comment, subscribe. Yeah, comment if you can, because it tells the algorithm that something good might happen here. And yeah, see you at our next playthroughs and things that we do here. Until next time, again, a big thank you to Laurie. And what it says there, which says, play a lot, play loads, as you Brits say, have fun. And bye-bye, fine folks, wherever in the world you are.